morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you here. I am Kim Young. I am president of the Conesville Historical Society. We will have a regular meeting following this. If anyone wishes to stay, we'll take a 5-10 minute break, have some refreshments, and we have a very brief meeting. We do have monthly programs. Next month, the second Tuesday, we have Dee Dee Thorpe, who is the Huntertown historian, coming to talk about Carl Stryker, who is the hero of the Twilight in Fire in Haynes Falls and in Twilight Park. And she will be telling that story. Carl Stryker was born here in Conesville and has quite the adventure we've kind of been following over the past year or so. Throughout the months of June, July, and August, July and August, we're hosting a series of field trips, which will be announced soon, as well as a square dancing event series. There's 3 of them. One is an educational event to learn about the history of square dancing, as well as like a teachable, here's the moves for a beginner square dancer. And then the following 2 will be practice square dancing for people of all ages. Those dates are being finalized as we speak, and then we'll move forward with that. So that's what's upcoming this summer, and then we'll resume regular monthly programs on the second Tuesday of the month come September. But here we are tonight, and I am really excited that we're able to partner with the Pratt Museum to have a presentation today about Pratt Rock, or Pratt's Rock, and I am thrilled to be introducing Carolyn Bennett, who is going to take over and give an introduction and give some reflections. So welcome, Carolyn and Steve. If you need a regular mic.
I don't think so. Can you hear me? Okay, so first let me say I have a vocal cord condition, which sometimes makes it difficult for me to speak. I imagine even more difficult for you to listen to. But now that Robert Kennedy is going on television, I've seen someone that has exactly the same thing that I do. I thought I imagined it, although I've been to a neurologist. But anyway, so hence the quality of my voice goes in and out. I'm here really to thank you, to thank Kim, the Conesville Historical Society, for this opportunity to have Steve talk about Pratt Rock Park. By the way, very interesting. There's a whole debate that has gone on probably for 100 years about whether it's called Pratt Rock or Pratt's Rock or Pratt Rocks. And the jury is still out, but we're going to ask Steve to solve it. So our town supervisor, Greg Cross, was going to be here today, barring any personal family matters. He's a dedicated family man. And then it turns out that Gilboa Conesville has their concert, and so his children are a part of it. But he sends his regards. He sends his regards to you. Yeah. And he likes to show his support, but he's actually the man that got the ball rolling in 2019, because when we presented the idea of restoring Pratt Rock Park, which belongs to the town, not the museum, we needed them to say yes, it was something they wanted to do, and so the town board deliberated for a long time, and it looked as though they were going to table it. And Greg, of all people, because he's fiscally very conservative, said, whoa, wait a second. This is a good thing for Prattsville. I make a motion, and here we are today. And we will, in the spring of 2025, start the actual restoration of both the stones and phase 1 of the park. Am I? Yeah. Okay. So Steve is here today. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. And I know I shouldn't read, but it's so impressive. First of all, I know he's a retired landscape architect, and he worked for 27 years for the New York City Parks Department. So every time I go down there, when I see a pocket park, I get all excited because I think, oh, Steve might have designed that. He earned a BFA and a BLA from Rhode Island School of Design and an MA in the history of decorative arts, design, and culture from the Bard Graduate Center. And he enjoys researching the cultural histories of gardens, furniture, and architecture. I first met Steve, or one of my first meetings with Steve was when I was helping to edit a magazine called Catskill Tri-County Historical Views. And Steve did this wonderful article on German painted chests from Schoharie and Mohawk valleys that we were very proud of. I brought copies in case anyone wants to know more about Steve's work. From there, he generously volunteered to come over to the Pratt Museum. And if you see our beautiful tulips and our boxwoods, that's Steve. From there, he joined the board, and he was on the board for a few years. And while he was on the board, he inventoried and cataloged 4 boxes of papers that are primary source documents belonging to Zadock Pratt and the Pratt family. Hence, he probably knows a lot more about Pratt and Prattsville than I do in a certain period of time. So he was eminently qualified. And when Prattsville was looking for a landscape architect to be the consultant, the main consultant for this project, they turned to Steve. And thank God he said yes. So with that said, I hope you'll help me welcome Steve Whitesell.
Good.
Oh, you're good.
Well, thanks so much, Carolyn, and thank you, Kim, for setting everything up. And how many people have been taking the walk up to Pratt Rocks Park? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little background and show you some photos of the rocks. And if you have any particular anecdotes, please, or questions, please. We'll think of this as a conversation more than as like a now hear this lecture. And we can, so as you are so moved, please just stop me and ask for clarification or whatever. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this remarkable man, Zadock Pratt Jr., who is the namesake for Prattsville. Although Prattsville was a small, before he arrived in 1824, Prattsville was a small village called Schoharie that had been settled in the late 18th century. Here's our friend Zadock. As a young man, in 1818, shortly after his first marriage, this was by the Kingston painter John Vanderlyn, and at that time he had just married Beda Dickerman, the daughter of a man who was also involved in the tanning business, and unfortunately she died of tuberculosis after 6 months, and he married her sister 4 years later, Esther, who died in 1824 of the same disease. After her death, he had taken the summer off to wander around the Catskills. That his father, Zadock Pratt Sr., had been a tanner in Jewett, Lexington, where we had spent most of his childhood. He was born in Stevenstown on the other side of the Hudson in October 30th, 1790, and had moved as a 6-year-old with his family to Middleburg, and then around age 12 they'd moved to what was then the town of Windham, which encompassed Jewett and Lexington. So he grew up. He's mostly an autodidact. He had very little schooling, but he was a curious and an accomplished reader, and very well traveled. And he, as you'll see, we accomplished quite a lot without the benefits of a formal education. So in 1824, he was exploring for sites for a possible a tannery in the Catskills, and he settled upon 1,300 acres in Schoharie-Kill and purchased those, and moved in October 1824 and set about building the dam that's still at the east end of town where people go swimming. And there's he was not a man without pretensions or hubris, and there's a number of legends that have arisen about his life, probably self-promulgated, and one of them is that after constructing this dam in November 1824 and impounding a pond for his future tannery, that he broke through the ice in November and swam across the pond. I wasn't there, I can't verify it. So in the spring of 1825, he set about building his tannery, a massive building, 430 feet long by, I think, 32 feet wide, and I'll show you a photograph of that a little later. He was sensitive to the suspicions of the townspeople about what his motives were for moving to town, and he made a point of emphasizing that he was there to live with them and not on them, since apparently some earlier speculators had despoiled the town and kind of taken the money and run, and he wanted to emphasize that he was there to make a life and to make a town. I'll show you some images of him in his later life. This is a photo from, he was a 2-term congressman, elected in 1836, served 1837 to 1839, declined a second term, but then was elected again in 1842, serving 1843 to 1845. And this is a portrait by Frederick Spencer that's at the museum that I hope you'll all visit, and emphasizes, he's holding a paper that emphasizes some of his legislative accomplishments that he was very proud of, including the reduction of postage. He was head of the Buildings and Ground Committee and emphasized that public buildings should be constructed of granite, marble, rather than moisture-wicking permeable stones, like sandstone, which was one of the federal buildings had been constructed of, and 20 years after he had advocated for the use of these less permeable stones, federal officials had contacted him about the despoilment of paper records that had been ruined by the absorption of water. So he also advocated for Transcontinental Railroad, the creation of the Washington Monument. What else? And then here's an image of him in later life. This is after he's retired from public life, divested of his interest in several tanneries, and his Prattsville Bank, which operated from 1843 to 1855, and at one time the the tannery in Prattsville was the the largest in the world, and operated from 1825, like I'd mentioned, until 1846, when he had basically removed the hemlocks from 12,000 acres of Catskill forest and had to move on. He did retain interest in other tanneries in Hunter, in Westkill, in Lexington, and later in life, he even partnered with a very young Jay Gould, the railroad tycoon, as a 22-year-old, and they were briefly partners in a tannery in Gouldsboro, Pennsylvania. He was married 5 times. As I mentioned, the Dickerman sisters, and then in 1829, he married Abigail Watson, whose father was also involved in the tanning business, among other projects, and she bore him 3 children: George, his son, pictured here as a young man, a daughter, Julia, born in 1832, and then a third daughter born in 1834, Abigail, who died in infancy, and her mother also died in childbirth. So he was widowed a 3rd time. And the following year, that was in 1834, and the following year he married her sister, Mary. Which was a long marriage. She lived until 1868, and was interested in the arts and promoted his advocacy for town improvements and educational activities. He was a great advocate for. He commissioned a lot of artworks, both as a public official and as a private person. Here's a photo of the tannery, or just a drawing of the tannery, an elevation, and the main tannery building. There were several tannery buildings, this being the main one, 430 feet long, 32 feet wide. And he had patented a number of innovations for improving the tanning process that was hemlock tanning. And this image, there's a print that I was looking for that I couldn't find. So this image is of a tannery in Amesbury, Massachusetts, but shows the men felling the trees and stripping the bark, which is the tannin-rich material that is soaked to produce this tannic liquor that tans the hides. And interestingly enough, the majority of the cow hides were imported from South America because there really wasn't a domestic beef or dairy industry at that time. That came later. So the lumber was really a waste product. All they were really interested in was the bark. And so entrepreneur that he was, he built, in addition to his own residence, which is now the Pratt Museum that you're familiar with, I hope, in 1826, he also built 100 houses in the town of Prattsville, and rerouted the main street and planted 1,000 trees along the road, along the streets. So, how many have been to the Pratt Museum here? Okay, good. Okay, here's an image of the Pratt House from 1844. That you'll see some of the oaks, the hickories, the elms that ornamented the streets, as well as, and on the left you'll see the bank building that had been built the year before in 1843. That after it was closed in 1855, it was rotated 90 degrees and attached to the Pratt House, where it remains today. You can see it. Its original location is slightly separated from the grounds where the post office is now, at the corner of Main Street and Washington Street. The ground, you'll see Colonel Pratt astride his favorite gray horse, Prince, prancing down the main street, and the two cast iron fountains and the garden temple that were located across the street on the site of Young's currently. So he, in addition to building his own house and the 100 houses in the town, he also built the Prattsville Academy for young men and a separate school for young women. The Prattsville Academy was originally a two-story structure and currently serves as the Prattsville Town Hall, though has been reduced in size to a single story. He also rebuilt the Dutch Reformed Church, which still exists, and just to the right of his mansion, that he built a stone Gothic Methodist Episcopal Church in 1835 that was taken down in the 1920s. So here, this map from 1825, the Jackson map. I apologize for the typo on the slide list, which says 1835. It was 1825, and it shows the 60-foot wide main street that he laid out. That the street in the Schoharie settlement had originally followed the creek. You'll also see the tannery buildings and the channel that was dug to direct water to the tanneries. And on the center right, you'll see the dam that was constructed to impound water. And in the center, you'll see the mansion, and where the road angles northwest, you'll see the spire of the Dutch Reformed Church. This view of this is interesting because it's a view of Prattsville from 1850, and it's the first view that I'm aware of that indicates the Pratt Rocks, the carvings that were commenced in 1841 and continued for 30 years until his death in 1871. And you can see that the carvings were always picked out with white paint, that's not a later addition. As several of the images that Pratt had commissioned of his namesake town, he is front and reclining under the hemlock tree, the source of his wealth. He was probably the seventh wealthiest man in the United States at one point. And you'll see Prince in the foreground and his two children playing along the creek. That it's a portrait of the town, but it's also an autobiographical image as well. And you can see in the center the Gothic tower of the stone Methodist Episcopal Church with his mansion next to it. This is an image that's in the Pratt Museum by the local painter Amos Hamlin Jr., again showing Pratt under the hemlock tree, admiring his namesake town with the Methodist Episcopal Church and the tannery buildings and the Dutch Reformed Church, with the bare hillsides in the background, denuded of hemlocks and forest. He had also commissioned a view of Prattsville by the American painter Asher Durand that you may be familiar with. And we've been looking for that painting for several decades and haven't found any record of what might have happened to it, except that it was in the possession of one of his business partners, C. Loop, who had a well-known art collection that was auctioned after his bankruptcy, that he had a townhouse in Manhattan at the corner of 26th Street and Madison Avenue that he grew bankrupt and despondent and killed himself, and then his collection was dispersed. If anyone has any idea where that painting might be, we're all ears. Yeah. This is from 1867, another view of Prattsville, much built up. It appears at this point that the tannery is gone, but there's a lot of additional settlement. There's settlement along Washington Street, up the hill. There's a lot of businesses on the creek side of the main street, which were mostly obliterated 2 years later when there was a massive flood in 1869. There's been, so the Irene floods in 2011 were an anomaly. It's something that's happened several times. Yeah, so I have some historic images of the rocks that again indicate that they've always been picked out with white paint, and that will probably be part of the restoration, is to identify a breathable coating that we can reapply to the rocks. These are probably from around 1910, and there were records of 5 carvers that were responsible for the Pratt Rock carvings over approximately 30 years. And part of the Pratt legend is that in 1841, a tramp had approached Colonel Pratt and asked for 50 cents so that he could get home for the evening. And the ever pragmatic Colonel Pratt had suggested that he work off the alms after he had explained that he was a stone carver by trade, and that he mentioned that he would pay him to begin commemorative carvings in a cliff outside town that he owned. And from 1842 on, he retained ownership of the park, what we know now as Pratt Rock Park, but had always made it available to the public. And after his death in 1871, his family had deeded the parkland, I think it's 16 acres, to the town of Prattsville, where it remains in their possession till today. So the first carvings were probably the bust of Zadock Pratt, and here, with some explanatory text about his birthplace, his birth year, and later George, that I'd showed you, the dashing young man in the uniform, who, unlike his father, had a considerable formal education, that he had received a doctorate degree in Germany, was very well traveled, both independently and with his father, spoke 7 languages, I believe, and was elected to the New York State Senate at a young age, and was a captain, I believe, in the New York 20th Militia, which was one of the first to volunteer to be deployed in the Civil War after the conflict broke out, and were stationed for several months outside of Washington, D.C., mustering and receiving their orders. And sadly, they were participating in the Second Battle of Bull Run at Manassas, Virginia, in August 1862, and George was, first his horse was shot out from under him, and then he remounted and re-entered battle, and then he was shot in the shoulder, and the bullet lodged near his spine, and he was paralyzed, that he was withdrawn from the battlefield by his company and evacuated to Washington, D.C., then by steamboat up the Hudson to Albany, where he was recuperating at his in-laws' house in Albany. He had married Anna Tibbetts, and they were the parents of two children, and sadly he died 12 days later on September 11th, 1862. So his grieving father undertook carvings to commemorate his son's memory that you see here, with profile and then explanation and some explanatory text about his life and accomplishments. And this was completed in 1863, so it probably entails one of the first Civil War memorials constructed, which is part of the reason, which is just one of the reasons that this is so significant. It's often referred to as the Mount Rushmore of the East for the complexity of the carvings, and thankfully they're in fairly good condition. There's some water seepage, but no major deterioration, and we're hoping that this effort to conserve the carvings and to reconstruct the park will preserve that legacy for future generations. It really is a remarkable resource, both locally, regionally, and nationally. So there's other carvings that commemorate events and accomplishments in Zadock Pratt's life. He was very proud of he kept meticulous records during his business career, and as a result, he wanted the government, the federal government, to establish a Bureau of Statistics, which he advocated for and was accomplished during his second legislative term. So that is, this hand holds a scroll describing the Bureau of Statistics. He was also proud of his legacy as a working man, rather than landed gentry like the cultivated Southern planters that were also served with him in Congress. And this arm and hammer indicates his working history. And a view probably from the 70s of an overview of the Pratt Rocks. And this is probably from around 2000, but you can see how they're arranged. Again, the text describing the life of George Watson Pratt, his late son, and some other views. There's also a portrait of his favorite horse, Prince, and an early carving of the hemlock. And this is shown with our conservation technician, Julianne Chianese from Cultural Heritage Conservation, which is preparing a report on techniques for preserving the carvings. There's this carving is a mystery to me. That it's to the east. It's one of the easternmost carvings, and it appears to be incomplete. And I'm not entirely sure what it is supposed to indicate, or why the carving was abandoned. Whether that was abandoned after his death in 1871, or what happened. But there it is. He also included personal mottos that he lived by, Do well and doubt not, with his coat of arms and the hemlock, the source of his wealth. Originally, he had planned to carve a tomb out of the cliff for himself and his family, which is shown here, but that was abandoned after there was so much water infiltration that the pervious shale rock it conducts water, which is one of the problems with the carvings, is that they, as during the winter freeze-thaw cycles, that there's some scaling of the stone. Not too bad so far, luckily. And we're working with Michael van Valkenburg Associates, a landscape architecture firm in Brooklyn, whose principal grew up in Lexington and whose grandparents had a farm across the street from the Rocks. So as a young man, he was very familiar with the park. And after a successful career that included a chairmanship of the landscape architecture department at Harvard University for decades, and operation of an international firm that has projects around the world, around the country, including the sculpture garden at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, a large park under construction in Austin, Texas, and several other projects, that he was persuaded by the very persuasive Carolyn Bennett to undertake a consultation on the conservation and restoration of the park and the project. And we're very grateful to have him here. I have a copy of his initial proposal, if you'd like to see it. And it's what is remarkable about it is just the restraint that he's shown. He's not coming in and making large gestures. It's just to keep it the quiet, contemplative place that it's always been and hopefully always will be. So there's at the lower level of the park, there's also a circle of hemlocks that encloses a burial ground for his favorite dogs and his favorite horses, including Prince, the gray dapple that you've seen in several of the portraits so far. And there's a very when I was going through the clipping file at the museum, it's actually 7 boxes of clippings that I assume that Pratt himself had taken out of local newspapers, and luckily they're on fine rag paper, so they're not like that wood pulp newsprint that they print on now, where you know after a week it crumbles into dust. So there was an obituary for old Prince, who died in his pasture at the age of 32, and it just brings tears to my eyes. He said he never felt the whip. So he's a much loved animal, and there's a record too of on Pratt's 63rd birthday that he celebrated by in the course of an afternoon riding Prince several dozen miles to one of his tanneries in Sampsonville in Ulster County and back. And that Sampsonville tannery had been part of a legacy. When both of his 2 surviving children, Julia and George, had turned 21, he gave them each $50,000 and a 50% interest in a tannery. And George got the Sampsonville tannery, and Julia got the Aldenville tannery. Julia's husband, I talked about Anna Tibbetts, George's wife, and Julia was married to Colin Ingersoll, who was a senator from Connecticut, and they lived in New Haven, where she died in 1898 and is buried in New Haven. George is in the Albany Rural Cemetery, which you may know from the several scenes from the Gilded Age that were filmed there. So here's, again, this is our consultant with one of the stone seats that was carved for rest on the way up the very steep circuitous path to the upper rocks. Again, there's carving of the hemlock under this overhanging boulder, and part of our restoration work is to bring in some fill so that the seats can actually be used again. They're kind of at a perilous height due to the erosion over several decades. Additional stone seats were carved closer to the west entrance here, and a more rustic stone seat here and here. There was this was originally the main west entrance from the town. And if you'll remember that 1850 print, there was sort of a zigzag path that led up to the carvings. Now most people enter the park from the east end, where the parking lot is, and work their way through past the kiosk and the dog and horse graves, and work their way up by a different route. But this was the original route, and there's massive slabs of stone, so that serve as practically an elevated sidewalk along the south side of the park. A recent view. In 2022, we contracted with another stone restoration firm, Integrated Conservation Resources, to closely inspect the carvings. So they rappelled down from the top, so that they can really get up close and personal with the carvings, and issued a report on the condition that we're using to direct the conservation contracts that will be issued. We have, through Carolyn's diligent and successful fundraising efforts, we have a significant amount of money from the Department of Environmental Conservation and other grants in the works to initiate that work, which will hopefully get started next spring, 2025. And another view of our technicians hanging on for dear life, like spiders on a silk. Taking a closer look at George's countenance, and you can see that there's a little bit of delamination on the text describing George Pratt that we want to nip in the bud. And a view from the top of Pratt Rocks Park, showing what a remarkable sight it is, looking east along the Scary Creek toward the high Catskills. So I hope that you'll be as excited about this important local resource as I am, and that you'll support the conservation effort. So thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Great. All right.
Are there any questions?
Where's Pratt buried?
Pratt, there's a cemetery on River Street in Prattsville where you go west on Main Street, and then right before the bridge over the creek, there's a right turn on River Street, and about a quarter mile down there's a cemetery on the right, and there's a large obelisk that marks his resting place. And it also commemorates Esther and Beta Dickerman, but they're buried apparently in Jewett at another cemetery. Yeah.
Where was the tannery?
Behind where Young's is now.
Okay.
Down that it's and there's really no trace of it. I think that the building materials that were used to construct it were repurposed in other locations, because I've tried to find it and I couldn't find a trace. It seems that the most extant feature from the tanneries is the dam.
Mm-hmm. And it was on the city side, or the town side of the river?
That's
on the
correct.
other side.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. Yes,
That's one long building. Is it a process where the leather goes through, or?
there's several vats, and it takes, it's a lengthy process of days or weeks.
Keep
Yeah.
moving it down?
Well, they keep moving it to different degrees of liquor, as they called it, which is just the tannin saturated liquids that the hides, the rough hides are soaked in for a time. And he received several awards for the quality of the leather that came out of the Prattsville tannery. And he was invited to display the leather at the 1851 exhibit in London, the World's Fair that was held where the Crystal Palace was. And Prince Albert awarded him several medals for the quality of his hemlock tanned leather. Yeah. Yeah. Is there a sample of any of the leather in the museum collection, Carolyn?
You know, if you trust word of mouth, oral history passed down, there is a pair of boots in the second floor male bedroom.
Yes, I know them.
Right, and you know, they kind of flop over.
Yeah.
Those were said to be Zadock Pratt's boots, and you
Oh.
can even see him wearing boots in that one
Yes.
photo. The other
Yes.
thing is that, the color of the leather, American leather, was more reddish, and I think the boots are too. The
Mhm.
color of British leather was more yellow.
It probably was a different tanning process.
And perhaps even a different bark.
Mhm. My understanding is that the primary product from the Prattsville tanneries was leather shoe soles.
Right.
And that there's a record of having produced over 2 million soles. And that he had employed 40,000 men at these various tanneries over the decades. So he really was a primary economic engine for the whole Catskill region, not just the town of Prattsville.
And also the thing I found interesting is he's among the first, I think he is the first in our region to apply the factory model, which
Mhm.
was being used in England in the Industrial Revolution.
Mhm.
So before that, there were small tanneries, and you could find them all over,
Like his father ran.
like his father ran.
Yeah.
And then he builds this gigantic tannery
Mhm.
with 4 buildings. Jerry asked the question, it went all through those 4 buildings before it came out as shoe leather. So it
Mhm.
must have been quite a,
Okay, quite a process, yeah. Mhm.
I had heard that his leather was fundamental for the Industrial Revolution's belts, machinery belts.
I have not heard that. I've not read that. Have you, Carolyn?
that Pratt was, no, but that leather was, endemic to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And because, when people come to the museum today, the first thing they want to do is to criticize Pratt for having stripped the bark and cut the trees. But what they don't realize is that absolutely everything was made of leather.
Mm.
So, their shoes, their belts, their jackets,
Saddles,
their
yeah.
saddles,
Mm.
but also the belts in their machinery
Mhm.
was made by leather. So without leather, they could not have survived.
Yeah,
So, I think it gives them a little pass.
yeah. And that agriculture had really cleared the rest of the forest that hadn't been cleared for hemlock tanning.
But also what we like to say is, yes, someone said to me, he was a company boss. Well, who wasn't back then. I mean, here you have Strykerville. Everybody was a company boss of some sort who
Yeah.
established a business and then attracted others to come. But he was a benevolent company boss, because after the tannery went out, he saw that the land was cleared and we would be good for dairy farming.
Yes.
So on that acreage that you see right there, that looks like grass there on the right, he had a 365 acre farm, and he set up a best practices dairy farm. He invited the people of Prattsville to come and to learn dairy farming. And by the turn of the century, so Pratt was then dead about
30
30
years.
years, there were 99 dairy farms in Prattsville alone. And that industry, plus the creamery that would grow out of that industry, fed those people until the 1950s, when the creamery ceased.
Yeah.
So there was an important looking for jobs, creating affordable housing with the wood that that was discarded.
Yeah.
So you take a place like Hunter, where Colonel William Edwards was there, and there's a famous painting by Sanford Gifford called Twilight on Hunter Mountain. And what you see is they abandoned the stripped trees, and fires would break out all over. Pratt didn't do that. He cut the trees down, built the houses, built one of the first planned communities in New York State, and sold those houses at very affordable rates to his workers, because he wasn't looking for his wealth to come from real estate. He was looking for his wealth to come from the steady workforce that he was going to create, which is why he gave to 3 churches. He was really very thoughtful about everything he did.
And
Now,
I think he fed his workers too at the tannery, didn't he? He gave them meals while
Yes,
they were
I mean,
working,
he also, if you.
and loaned them money, and
He loaned the money, so if you wanted to do something like you wanted a hat factory, he would go in business with you, and he would not charge you interest. And he wasn't overly concerned if you couldn't pay him back, although if you could, that was great. But he knew it was good for his town.
Yeah.
And his town did grow and become an incredible town for a while.
And there were 1,400 residents, I think, around the time of the Civil War.
That's right.
And what is it today, like 500? 400?
So today, it's 800 and some odd property owners, but it's actually 189 year-round residents.
Okay.
So in some ways, although this is not necessarily a conversation to have tonight, we look at history today with, we're really hard on those people. And some of the reasons why we're hard on them are for good reason. However, the other thing is that what I think Pratt's death showed is there was no visionary after that in town, and the town just went all the way down.
Yeah.
Now Greg Cross is a new visionary, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but there's so many interesting anecdotes about Pratt and his family and his legacy, who continue to show up from time to time and donate personal effects to the museum. And there's 3 main archives that I can think of dealing with Pratt and his legacy at the Pratt Museum, and then also at Boston University, where Julia's family, the Ingersolls, had donated a lot of Pratt effects. And at the New York Historical Society, they have a big Pratt archive. If you're interested,
Steve.
well, I think he's he's a larger-than-life character.
Yeah.
Certainly, he had an extremely healthy ego. And
Yeah.
I think that he left enough monuments, but so do a lot of well-known people. Gosh, I just watched last night on Netflix Halston. Well,
Yeah.
if he didn't have an ego, I don't know. But he left a legacy, and I think that a lot of this, like Pratt Rock Park, the museum, his whole town, he was crying out to be remembered. He left those things for us
Yeah.
to remember him more so than lots of others did.
Yeah, but a very significant cultural and educational legacy as well. It wasn't just, I don't, like, you could think of just some crude, vulgar, yeah, there's, how many examples could you cite? And I don't think that he follows that path,
He didn't.
path at all. So, yeah. Yes, I'm sorry.
So, I'm enjoying hearing how Prattsville survived so well. Down in southern Delaware County, the acid factory industries, and I think the towns of Corbett, Colchester, Beerston, sprang up, thrived for a season till the hemlocks were gone, but the companies owned, if I remember right, the houses, and I don't believe they were inclined to get them in the hands of the laborers and so on. And mostly those houses, those little towns are just a historical marker now. I don't think there's much left of them. Beerston, of course, is under the Conesville Reservoir.
Oh,
Does anybody have some comment on? And that was for acid. Now, was that used for tanning? Does somebody know? Can somebody help me?
not that I'm aware of.
Well, I
don't
mean,
think it was
certainly
anything
the
that caustic.
tannin had an acidic quality,
Yeah.
but, so the tannin had an acidic because it was tannic acid, that was.
Yeah, but I don't think it was that caustic,
No,
really,
I don't
as
think
what this gentleman is describing.
Yeah,
But I think that's interesting in that it's a different legacy, like that sort of follows the precursors to Pratt in Schoharie-Kill that came and took and left. This sounds like kind of the same despoliation method, that rather than creating a town and creating a legacy, like we see in Prattsville.
right. I mean, Pratt used his own money, of course, to build the schools,
Yeah.
because he wanted to afford education, which he valued, even though he didn't have one himself. He endowed all three churches because he wanted them
Yeah.
to have a stable spiritual life. Again, he wanted them to have a living wage. I think it's very different
Yeah.
than when he goes into partnership with the young Gould. In Pennsylvania, the tannery is called the Gouldsboro Tannery. Gould takes all he can
Yeah.
out of that town and those people. Pratt finds out about it, and he doesn't make a big deal, but he wants just what he had given Gould to start the business back. He doesn't want any part of that
Yeah.
way of
Connecting
working
this, yeah.
on people.
And I understand it was a very brief partnership.
And not only that, they
Yeah.
changed the name. It's not called Gouldsboro
Yeah.
anymore. So
It's not a
I don't
grateful
think
legacy,
they
yeah.
even-
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention was just how, as a self-taught man, I think one of his proudest moments was he received an honorary degree from Union College in Schenectady. And I think that he emphasizes that several times. There's several timelines of his accomplishments that I assume were that he had participation in producing, because they were during his lifetime. It's very confusing because there's conflicting information in each of the four that I've found. So, in terms of so when did you marry Hessler anyway? It's like 4 different dates. But he mentioned several times just his pride at receiving that honorary degree from Union College. You know, that really validated his achievements as an educated gentleman.
Right, yes.
So,
And yet he always honored the working man.
yes.
He himself dedicated his life, even in Congress, to the betterment of the working man, because he knew what it meant to work hard. He himself had worked
Yeah.
very hard. So it's a lot to like about the man, and there are other things that,
That don't read as well from a contemporary viewpoint. But
you know,
But, you know, you can look at, you know, our founding fathers and stuff like that, you can do the same thing. That they don't hold up under contemporary eye, but it doesn't erase their legacy.
right. So that was about, I did it about 2 years ago. So it was 189 year-round residents, all the rest either second home owners or property owners. Although, I mean, second homeowners are wonderful for the economy,
Yeah.
they're wonderful people.
I always thought so.
I absolutely think so. So I didn't want to, but the idea that having lived up here, I've lived up here about 45 years now, and so I always wondered, how come I just see the same like 50 people in town all the time? Until I found out.
That's all there are.
That's why, all the time.
Have I missed anybody? I'm sorry.
Was the name changed to Prattsville after he died or before?
No, it was changed in 1832. And according to contemporary reports, it was an initiative undertaken by the townspeople rather than enforced by the namesake. So as an honorary, so that had originally, and Scarykill had originally been part of the town of Wyndham. I think when it was separated into its own town in 1832, then they undertook the name change to Prattsville. Yeah.
What was the name Prattsville? The town or the hamlet first?
The town, I'm not sure when it was separated into town
It's really
and hamlet.
interesting because even the village itself doesn't think, they think that calling the village of Prattsville was just kind of like a colloquialism. But the village was actually incorporated, but in the early 20th century. And the town did not even have those records until we came upon them after the flood. So,
So is it still a village?
excuse me?
Is there still a village
You know,
of Prattsville?
so, it depends on who you ask, but they have not acted in any way on the incorporation as if it's valid. They've shown absolutely no interest in it.
It's interesting because I've been reading about the village of Tannersville and conversation about dissolution there.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if Prattsville had been dissolved, but it sounds like
I just know that it was filed away somewhere, and history forgot it for some reason. They just all acted like a town, so I think they probably just a town.
that's interesting. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Okay. Good.
We do have refreshments if anyone wants to grab some. In about 5 minutes, we'll start our meeting.